On the last episode of the Keepsake Box. You have to understand the general way of thinking when I was growing up. I was always made aware of the fact that I wasn't the preferred shade of brown. My peers let me know that. My family let me know that. For some reason, it wasn't sufficient to refer to me as dark-skinned. They referred to me as black, as if their lighter skin made them of an alternate race. Rumor is, my family has a long history of picking mates based on their skin tone, opposed to other, more important attributes. I can't prove that to be true, but I have several miserable family members. They all have light-skinned children, though. They were always very mean to me, and we never really associated with them much. They were the pretty red-boned girls. Grandma always said that they thought they were better than other people, but I wasn't one of those. I was Shelonda. I was Margaret's black grandbaby. I was Donna's ugly child. That's how the world saw me, and that's how I saw myself. Chapter 3, Changes. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. Things changed drastically during my 7th grade year. Mom decided to move us into her boyfriend Ron's house. Ron and Mom were introduced by Grandma, and they had been dating for a few years. Ron attended our church, and he always seemed like a nice guy. After a while, however, I started to see some things in him that concerned me. Grandma told me that I should be happy that Ron had taken an interest in me, in spite of the circumstances. But it bothered me that he tried to take on a fatherly role so quickly. I know that sounds crazy, considering the fact that I didn't know my biological father, but it didn't feel genuine, and that was problematic for me. Within a few weeks of him dating Mom, Ron started telling me that I could call him Dad. I was comfortable calling him Mr. Ron, and everyone seemed to accept that. No one complained, and no one offered a rebuttal. There was something very strange and offsetting about Ron, but Mom didn't seem to notice. She was infatuated with him. Ron stepped in and changed everything that I knew to be true about my mother. She even started attending church a little more regularly, something that she hadn't ever done much of. Mom built Ron up and validated him whether he was right or wrong. He was one of those know-it-all types, and Mom was more than happy to toot his horn. She made him think that he knew everything and that he was good at everything. Present day, I think things would have been different if Mom had put a portion of that effort into validating me as well. It's crazy how a person can understand the value of validating a partner, but not see the benefit of speaking that same positivity into a child, their child. Childhood experiences play integral roles into who we ultimately become. That's the point in time where anything can be put into or taken out of a child's mind. The unfortunate thing is, some parents don't understand that until it's too late. Many don't ever understand it at all. I can honestly say that my situation fell into the latter scenario. A large part of me was annoyed by Mom's toleration of Ron's antics. The other part of me thought she was just doing what it took to keep her man. That's the goal, right? She certainly worked hard at that. And Ron solely reaped the benefits. And in return, Ron would end up testing Mom's loyalty in every way imaginable. A few months into the relationship, Ron lost his job. Although he was adamant that his firing was some grave miscarriage of justice, I remember thinking that there was probably more to the story. I was sure of it. Ron claimed that his firing was a result of the system trying to keep the black man down, but I had my own beliefs about how he ended up in that situation. I had personally witnessed Ron drinking prior to going to work. I was convinced that Ron's inability to control his alcoholism had contributed to his predicament. Nonetheless, he stuck to his story, and Mom had no problem believing it. She never even questioned it. Needless to say, Ron was left with a lot more time on his hands, and that's when things became problematic for everyone involved. Ron lived on the other side of town, and living there meant that I was no longer in the same school district. It didn't seem practical to transfer in the middle of the school year, so newly terminated, Ron was responsible for chauffeuring me for the remainder of the term. He dropped me off at Grandma's house to catch the bus in the mornings and picked me up from there in the afternoons. That's when I first started to notice that Ron's cracks were developing into large holes. He kept a flask under his driver's seat, and he wasn't shy about randomly taking a swig as he drove. When Ron picked me up in the afternoons, he often smelled like alcohol. Sometimes he slurred his words and looked visibly intoxicated. Mom didn't get home until around 6 o'clock p.m. I guess she assumed that he started drinking after he arrived home. I mentioned to Mom that I felt uncomfortable with Ron drinking and driving me around. I'm not sure what I expected from her. Maybe I expected her to at least have a conversation with him, even if she didn't follow through. Maybe I expected some form of pacification on her behalf. Instead, Mom told me to stop exaggerating. She said that Ron had a lot on his plate, and he occasionally needed to relieve some pressure. She also told me that I would understand things better when I was older. Not only do I not understand it now that I'm older, but I also recognize that as the point in time when I started to understand that it was not beneficial to talk to Mom about things that made me uncomfortable, especially when Ron was involved. Mom devalued my thought processes and made it difficult for me to trust my own judgment. She made me question the validity of my concerns. It became easier to talk myself out of what I initially thought to be the right things. Nothing made sense after a while, and I just wanted things to go back to the way they were, back before Ron. I didn't feel comfortable with the direction that my new life was headed. Everything from my old life tipped me off to the fact that things were going the wrong way. Mom once told me that being around Grandma gave me a very one-dimensional view of the world, which is why she'd refused to let me stay with her when she moved in with Ron. I didn't want to move, and I didn't want to change schools. It's not that I had an extreme attachment to Grandma or my school, but they were both familiar. I knew what to expect from Grandma. She really wasn't all that bad. Sure, she said some things that stung, but I was mostly safe as long as I stayed out of the way and did as I was told. I also knew that Grandma was going to cook my favorite things. I hadn't ever known Mom to cook much, and she wasn't particularly good at it. In school, I probably should have been overly excited to leave. But once again, it was familiar. I only had one real friend, but she was accepting of me. I wasn't very popular with my classmates, but I knew what to expect from them. Just like with Grandma, I had the occasional negative interaction, but I was mostly safe as long as I stayed out of the way. What if the kids at the new school were really mean? What if it wasn't sufficient to just stay out of the way? What if all of the girls were having sex? Surely I'd stick out like a sore thumb. I didn't like new things, and I experienced a lot of anxiety in reference to starting over. Familiarity was comfortable, even when it was uncomfortable. Everything that was familiar to me was being stripped away, and I struggled to find my place. After a while, Ron no longer took me to Grandma's house to catch the bus. I guess it seemed a bit out of the way. He took me straight to school in the mornings and picked me up from school in the afternoons. I didn't like that either. In spite of it all, a part of me missed Grandma. I saw her at church on Sundays, and we ate dinner at her house afterwards. Otherwise, I didn't see much of her, and that time was about to decrease. Mom came into my bedroom one night and told me that things were about to change. Ron had decided to follow his dream of becoming a preacher. She told me that she would be picking up extra hours as Ron would not be working until he found a church that would allow him to preach. Mom also told me that I would need to step up a little. Since she would be working extended hours, she needed me to do more of the cooking and cleaning. A part of me was relieved. I used to cook with Grandma all the time, and I was fairly certain that I could cook better than Mom. I didn't mind picking up the slack around the house, but I was troubled by the other aspect of the situation. I couldn't make myself comfortable with the idea of Ron becoming a preacher. He didn't seem like the preacher type. I was young, but I was very much aware that Ron did a lot of ungodly things. In addition to the drinking, Ron also cursed a lot. Otherwise, I knew that he and Mom were fornicating, as I had heard them on several occasions. Ron was in stark contrast to everything I had been taught to value in a man of the cloth, and that made me uncomfortable. But when I thought about it, Mom did say that I had a one-dimensional view of life. Maybe religion wasn't as cut and dry as I thought. Ron managed to find a church fairly quickly. He didn't preach every Sunday, and it was obvious that his part-time gig wasn't very lucrative. Mom still had to work extra hours, and there was never really a surplus of money floating around. Ron stayed with it, though. It was the only thing that he seemed to be dedicated to. After he accepted the position, we had dinner at home and no longer went to Grandma's after church. I ended up straddling the fence in reference to our new arrangements. Our new church was a lot less strict, and there were more young people than at Grandma's church. While I liked the church structure more, going there meant that I no longer saw Grandma on a consistent basis. Whenever I asked Ma about Grandma, she brushed me off and told me that things sometimes change. I assumed that she and Grandma had experienced a falling out of some sort, but as usual, my family didn't talk about those things. We started attending church a lot after Ron became a preacher. At first, it was multiple services on Sundays. Eventually, we started going several times a week for random midweek services. Even though Mom was at work for most of the midday services, Ron and I went religiously. Pun intended. Our new church was completely different from Grandma's traditional church. I was happy that there was less judgment, but it felt strange, considering what was normal for me at the time. Women came to our new church wearing pants. They sang a lot of upbeat songs, some of which were renditions of popular R&B songs. Grandma always told me that there should be a very clear distinction between what happens in the church and what happens in the world, a rule that obviously didn't apply there. I felt guilty about enjoying it for a little while, but I eventually began to agree with Mom. Maybe Grandma's way wasn't the only way to praise. Sometimes things change. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.